Hello and welcome to The Society with Fatma Shaheen at PTV World. Now, we have seen that over a period of time, efforts have been made to improve, rather refines our current education system. But having said that, a lot still needs to be done. When we talk about educational reform, there are not one, rather several areas that we need to touch upon. What are those areas? This is exactly what we'll be talking about in our today's show. We'll be talking about the dire and the very pressing need to actually reform and to improve the quality and standard of Pakistan's education system. More particularly, we'll be talking about the manner in which we can overcome infrastructural handicaps. We'll also be talking about the need to actually ensure teacher training and teacher development. And in this regard, we'll also be shedding light upon the fact that, why we must actually make it more easier for people, rather for the girl child, to access the education system. This and much more to follow on today's show. And to do that, let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for the show today is Ms. Fiona Robertson, who is a Senior Academic Manager at the British Council. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show. My second panelist for the show today is Mr. Muhammad Ali, who is an expert on education and in the development sector. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum salam, thank you.
You're most welcome. And my third panelist for the show today is Ms. Aruj Fatma, who is a certified teacher trainer alongside being an educationist. Assalamu alaikum ji and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. So to start the conversation with you, Fiona, I think to get the basics sorted, we must talk about, the exemplary work that you are doing, and in this regard, of course, bringing about this education revolution. So when we talk about the programs that you are giving out to out-of-school children so as to bring them in, tell us about the nature and scope of these programs and how precisely are you aiming to bring children, more particularly girls, back to school?
EDGE is a program that is both for girls who want to get back into the education system, and then it can also be standalone. It can be a project where girls who are out of the system can stay out of education system, but they're participating in the EDGE clubs. So EDGE is English and digital for girls' education. Girls aged between 13 and 18, so adolescent girls, are meeting twice a week in clubs where they work through a program on their own without a teacher of English skills and digital skills, and also social awareness, so that they're aware of their rights.
So it's a very basic kind of a program.
It lasts for 3 years. So by the time they get to the end of the 3 years, their English and digital skills will actually be quite developed.
Right. But the question then is that I'm sure you get approached by so many people, Fiona, but you have to do that filtration. Of course, you can't keep everybody who's approaching you. So what is that criteria on your part to choose that, who gets to be part of the program and benefits from it and who doesn't?
So what works really well is to embed EDGE into an already existing program. So before we were working with ITA, with Bela, who was on the show, and we inserted EDGE into their accelerated learning program. So we have the structure and the clubs are inserted into that program.
Right.
So it could be a program for accelerated learning in schools. It could also be a program for out-of-school girls.
Right. So basically the nature varies depending on, of course, the kind of, child you are, seeking to educate. But I think here it's very important that we talk about second chance programs too. I think something which a lot of parents might not possibly be aware of. So do you cater to such programs too?
So in this case with EDGE, it is definitely second chance. I mean, we had a story of a girl who, she got married at 15. And she desperately wanted to learn English and also her digital skills because she realised how important it was for her to work.
Right.
Her husband, who was a labourer, wouldn't let her, didn't want her to go back into education. And she fought at the risk of getting divorced. She didn't get divorced. But her husband, then relented, and he said that she could go into the EDGE programme because it was in the community, a safe space, and they agreed. And then she was able to use her newly acquired skills to set up a little business. She was contributing to the income.
So basically then I think this is something which has such a wide scope at the end of the day, and again then I believe it's not very age specific too, because if she got married and then she got divorced, so of course I'm assuming that she had to be a major by that definition. So
she was 15.
She was 15. Oh, so it was an underage marriage.
So she didn't get divorced. She didn't get divorced. Luckily, her husband did let her go and pursue her education.
Right.
And then the
so
family
you're talking about it from the perspective of the family being comfortable so as to let the female members of their families to actually approach and be part of your program, because a lot of times we see that families are not that happy about it, or they have this certain kind of a mindset where they don't want to prioritize girls' education.
So we need to campaign in the community. We need the community to accept the fact that the girls are attending these clubs.
Right.
And then it sort of snowballs into, so in South Punjab, where we started off the Edge clubs, initially there was resistance, but when the other members of the community saw that the girls were getting really viable education, that it was helping the whole community, people became more favourable that they were attending the clubs. So that meant that the second time we implemented the programme, people were actually asking us if their girls could attend.
On which I'll come to you, sir. I think we've generally spoken about the enrollment issue. I think we must equally focus on the quality of education, because that again is something on which we really need to work on. So when we talk about improving the quality of the education system in Pakistan, what do you feel as a senior educationist yourself are the most important things that we need to work on?
Yeah, first, I mean, I would like to echo what Fiona has said, and these are some of the good examples where peer-to-peer learning, you set an example and that can work as a change maker.
Right.
If you can guarantee safety, security, a good career to a student, to a parent, and then parent can ultimately spread the word within a community and bring back
and this is something which of course not she is doing, British Council is doing. We've seen this in so many other countries. I remember this whole concept of collective education being very popular in Japan as well, where they train particularly one particular person in the family, and then they have the trickle down effect of training others. So basically, coming back to my question, when we talk about the quality of education, what do you feel are the areas that we need to work on?
Basically, quality standards need to be set up, right? If we talk about the teacher training specifically, there's a lot of diversity. We are working in 7 states after the constitutional amendment, 18th amendment, the most popular one. So each and every province has their own standards and have their own policies. If we talk about the teacher training, and that is an area where British Council is working, and it's been ages. We are working very closely with government. So EDGE program or Connecting Classroom program or the other capacity building programs that we are running, Take a Child to School, these are the different programs through which British Council is working with government.
Right.
So in terms of standards, they vary from government to government, province to province. And those standards need to be updated on regular basis.
Right.
Quality assurance mechanism, I hardly see in
I think monitoring
systems.
the performance is so important, more so of teachers here that way. I think there is a very dire need for us to inculcate those technology centric skills into our children, because we can't expect 21st century children to be taught by 20th century teachers at the end of the day. So I think your narrative on this is something which is very important, because you are a teacher at the end of the day, something which I at least as a bystander feel is not there in a Pakistani education system, or at least if it is there, I think there is still a dearth of it. So how do you as a teacher see this, because we all understand the fact that investing in our teachers is extremely important if we actually want to improve the quality of education?
Absolutely, you're right about this. Actually, the students are the reflection of the teacher. So if the teachers are not well versed with whatever they're going to teach, of course, the byproduct won't be as good as we expect it to be. So at this moment, private sector, they're working rigorously on this, and they have developed, and they have not only developed, they're actually, training teachers. every year, not only taking them, they also train them every now and then. As far as public sector is concerned, I think so there's a lot of work required to do, which I'm sure, British Council is already actively working, but I still feel that there's a lot of gap which needs to be filled in. But public sector, they have already taken up this responsibility and they're doing a pretty good job.
Right. But when we talk about teacher training, I think we also must be very clear in our minds at what all should it entail in terms of, not just being limited to ensuring that, you have the right person for the right job, like in the sense that, the teachers have the right qualifications, but we also need to ensure, the mannerism that they use to teach children, the environment, how conducive an environment do they create when they do that, what are the tools that they are using. So what all as a teacher do you feel should and should not be part of such, development programs?
So what I feel, is lacking at this moment, whenever, we take the teachers in schools, we generally take them on their, current qualifications. What we really lack is the basic teaching license, which, our teachers, they do not have an access to.
Which other countries you were telling me about, they have, like
generally
like
Finland, and in UAE, whenever they want to take up a teacher or they want to take up teaching assignment, they need to have a teaching license before they can actually become a teacher. So I think that sort of criteria needs to be, brought to Pakistan as well before we, take any teacher to the schools.
Right.
So that one part is missing, but, since private sector has already, actively started working on it, whenever they take teachers, they take them on their basic qualification, and after that, they, work actively on their teaching skills in terms of pedagogical skills, how to set up a conducive learning environment for students, what are the individual needs of the students and how to cater, how to reflect on your own practices and how to improve those practices according to the learner's needs. This is what is already, being worked on in private sector.
And I think one thing perhaps which we must, of course, we shouldn't ignore is the fact that when we talk about teaching as a profession, I at least feel that, unfortunately in our society, till date, it is not given that level of respect perhaps which other professions are given, especially, when we talk about hardcore professions like medicine, engineering, or maybe, civil service, any other profession. So I think this, unfortunately, lack of respect that we do attach to the teaching profession, that in itself also kind of demotivates teachers, because usually we see people opting to be teachers just because they feel that it's easy money on the side, it's kind of a part-time job that they can easily do. So maybe we need to get our dynamics clear that way too, on which I'll come to you, madam. I think we must talk about the teaching development programs that you are also running this way. So tell us about those programs that how do they practically aim to train teachers, and what are the mechanisms that you people use to actually assess the teachers' performances?
So teacher development has really, made a lot of headway in the past couple of decades. And it's no longer just training, maybe 1 or 2 weeks training. It's embedded into the school system. And to be honest, particularly Punjab government is doing a lot to do that, not just through British Council, but through other organisations like the World Bank. There have been a lot of programmes. And this means that there's a digital structure which teachers are already part of. They're inserted into the system, and digital is built into teacher development. It's something that's ongoing. So it has to be part of the teacher's daily job. It's not something that you just do in the summer holidays. It's not something
extra over and above that. And I think this way you're also making it very easy, Fiona, for the teachers too, who don't have to travel long distances, especially, those teachers who belong to remote areas of the country, for whom I think maybe traveling to a certain place to get that particular training or program, that would actually be an obstacle for them to actually seek it. So I think that's very convenient. But what are the challenges that you people come across? Because, a lot of times we see that, digital devices are being used, internet is also being used. We see online teaching training programs being conducted. But then, of course, there is that pool of teachers who perhaps are not very comfortable using the internet, or who've not had that exposure of being in the digital world. So how do you train such teachers who aren't very familiar with all this, digitization of the world, so to speak?
So you'd be surprised actually how advanced teachers are and the headway that they've made in the past couple of years. I think there was a recent study done in Punjab with primary teachers, and they nearly all have connectivity. They all have smartphones because they're on the government system already. and they've already accessed training on the curriculum and various other things. They've received digital training so that they're prepared before they actually start the specific training. They're trained on how to use the apps.
Right.
So it's not on, so you can use it on your laptop, but because most teachers have a smartphone, and people now nearly everywhere have smartphones. So they download the app and they've got their smartphone. They can do the courses in their own time.
Right, madam, your point is noted. On which I'll come to you, Ali Saab. I think we must also talk about, the need to have policies which actually make teacher development a priority. So how do you assess the current policies that we do have at a provincial level? What focus, what importance do they place on teacher development?
Well, teacher development is a provincial subject, like you said. There is a national policy, and that is a reference for other provinces to develop their own policies and education sector plans. Just like in Punjab, we have Deal 2025 that was announced by former government, and now the current government also had a roadmap. So there's a lot of diversity in terms of culture, in terms of approach towards education, geographical challenges, demographic challenges, and then the teacher recruitment. So the framework that we suggest or we recommend on the basis of our experience of working with teaching community are like the policies should have a framework, and that framework start from teacher recruitment, induction, and then the continuous professional development.
This is exactly what I was thinking, that it must be something which must be, ongoing. It can't be a stagnant process, because, teacher development, like any other profession's development, has to be a continuous process. And I think in this, you would also want to add something to that effect. I think we must also talk about this very glaring issue of ghost schools and ghost teachers, something that we often hear of in Pakistan. So, considering that countries like UK have actually formed commissions and bodies who physically go and actually inspect schools so as to close them down if they are not there and they're just there on papers, can we not expect something similar in Pakistan? Because this is a very pressing issue in our education system at the end of the day.
Absolutely, it is actually. Pakistan do have a quality assurance department, but the point is that how effective it is. Are they actually going to the places and visiting schools and monitoring what's going on over there? Are they looking at the enrollment of the students? Are they looking at the induction of the teachers and the kind of quality education they're providing to the students? This all has to be looked after in a very structured manner. Probably they need to look at an online portal or something where they can enroll all the students over there, they can enroll all the teachers over there, and then they can monitor their progress in terms of how academically strong the students are going and how teachers are performing in this classrooms.
Right, Arooj, your point is noted. On which I'll come to you, madam. I think we must all also touch upon the social contours of today's topic of discussion. When we talk about ensuring that children, more particularly girls, get that access to education, we must also be very cognizant and aware of the fact that we do see a lot of socio-cultural stereotypes being attached to them not being able to acquire the same. So, considering that you are very actively advocating for the girls' right to seek education, what are the most typical stereotypes that you come across, and how do you overcome the same?
So regarding girls, I mean, the most obvious one is the belief that girls don't need as much education as boys.
Right.
And, it's not just in Pakistan, I want to add, but of course they do, because if a girl, even if she doesn't go out to work, as a mother, an educated mother is going to be more effective in bringing up her children. And it could be basic things like hygiene, managing, family accounts. It could be awareness of, what's available for her children, for her family, so all kinds of things like that. But the other most important thing about girls' education is that the girls, women, are able to make informed choices for themselves.
Right.
So, but then, we have to look in a wider scope, because the boys, of course, also need to be educated.
Right.
That the girls have the same rights.
I was about to come to that, because of course, we have siblings, and if the boys are aware of that, if they are cognizant of that, then they won't have those typical stereotype, attached to girls' education, something you were earlier saying as well. But when we talk about, this whole issue, we can't, inevitably ignore the role of parents here. So does your work also extend then to counseling counseling the parents too? Because then more often than not we do see that this kind of hesitance to get girls educated is coming from the parents themselves.
Particularly in EDGE, so the EDGE program, so before we start the clubs, we go into the community and we inform the community, what EDGE is, and that creates a dialogue with the parents. And as we move forward with the project, we're bringing the parents into the project. So they're part of it. It's for the community. It's for the girls, but it's for the wider community.
Right. So then again, the scope of your programs is just not, stricto sensu limited to girls. It also extends to families and in the larger picture to communities too, on which I'll come to you, Ali Saab. I think she's raised some very valid points on which I would want you to deliberate further. Now, when we talk about, of course, removing all these typical stereotypes, which unfortunately are attached, with girls' education, what role can media play in this regard? Because we all understand the fact that media has become the fourth pillar of the state, and of course it has that power to make and change perspective. So how can we ensure that media uses this power in a constructive manner to help us actually shun away all these typical stereotypes which are attached with girls' education in our society?
Well, that's a very good question. And media, in terms of presence, social media, the top trends that I've been following on Twitter and other social media forums, and even the mainstream media, I'm not sure, if there are any professional development schemes for the media people. Well, they're trained to report on education side and how much investigative that is, because that is a very sensitive sector. And you're talking about the vulnerable population.
We generally do have, the PEMRA laws and the guidelines which guide us, and of course the code of conduct. But I understand where you're coming from, that, when it comes to reporting on specialized issues, and of course many more by that definition, I think these are the things that we need to work on, that we need to ensure that the person reporting is media literate about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the help of Higher Education Commission as a part of, who's our strategic partner in higher education programs, we have designed a program for PROs a few years back, and that was public relation officers. And trust me, the content of that program was desired by some of the popular, renowned global journalists. And when we talk about the specific sector, in order to cover some success stories around research, development, ORIX, industry academia linkages, that was a very specialized field. And there are curriculums and modules and courses available. So I think media can play a lot of positive role in terms of promoting these messages across, and advocacy and raising awareness, which media is already doing.
And of course, and I think in this regard, we all need perhaps better coordination amongst all the stakeholders. And we do see media coming together with civil society, even with the government and, human rights activists, so many other parts of the Pakistani society to advocate for such important causes. So why not for the cause of education, which is actually a fundamental to start off with, on which I'll come to you, Ruth. I think when we talk about the need for educational reform, we must also focus on the need for inclusivity in our educational system. And in this regard, we see that, when we talk about inclusiveness, inclusiveness is something which is very broad. We have to, include special children, we have to include transgender children, we have to include maybe children who belong to a different ethnicity. So as a, a teacher trainer out there, more so as an educationist, how inclusive do you feel is our current Pakistani education system?
We need to look at the current Pakistani education system in two aspects. One is the private sector and one is the public sector. Private sector, they're already quite, welcoming when it comes to inclusivity. They do not, I haven't witnessed any discrimination when it comes to special children, but cognitively, when it comes to, special children physically, or when it comes to, special children in terms of any other, development need they might have.
But do schools here give that leverage of reasonable accommodation? Because, a lot of times we do hear of cases where people say, students say more so that, they haven't been refused admission, or they were not allowed to sit in the examination hall, give an exam paper for that matter, just because they asked for that, particular kind of an extra facility, whatever that facility may be, in order to get them, reasonably accommodated.
In private sector, I would not say that it is such the case. You know, for suppose if some child is visually impaired and the child would request a paper to be published in a certain font, we would definitely could accommodate it right away. We would not, you know, refuse it. And when it comes to physically challenged child, and you know, for suppose if the classroom is at level 1 or level 2, we will, you know, consciously bring the class level down to the ground level, so that the child, you know, doesn't have to take up stairs, or you know, in case they're on wheelchair, they can just, you know, quickly go to the classroom, being at the, you know, ground level. So at the private sector, it is you know, taken care especially, but at the public sector, I think so a lot of infrastructure changes are required over there, or maybe some awareness is required.
I think the infrastructure handicaps are those that we need to address, but at the end of the day, I think you know, slowly and steadily we do see positive trends emerging that way, and we do see that, you know, we are making you know, our system more inclusive that way. I remember last year or so, we did see, even for that matter, some transgender schools opening up, although of course that was, you know, in a different school. But I think when we look at inclusivity again, at least we are thinking that yes, they need to be brought in the mainstream, and there is something that we need to do for them. So that I think from that angle is something definitely very heartening. On which I'll come to you, madam. I think coming towards the conclusion of the show, a very important thing which we must highlight during the course of today's conversation is the need to equalize the quality of education which is being imparted in Pakistan. As we all understand now that, you know, following the 18th Amendment, education is a provincial subject now. So how easy or difficult would it be practically then to ensure that, you know, when we are talking about equalizing the quality of education, that is just not a myth, that is something which stands there in reality?
Well, obviously there's a huge difference between the sort of top level private sector schools and the government sector schools. But working, you know, predominantly with the government sector, we have some amazing success stories. There are some amazing teachers, because teachers who are dedicated to staying in the government sector are really good teachers. There's been a lot of teacher development. And I think, you know, again, you need to help us to highlight these stories, to tell these success stories.
Madam, this is exactly why I'm having this show today. So we talk about, you know, that untapped potential that people don't know about in Pakistan. We need to highlight such success stories.
Exactly. So in a previous project called Peely, that some people might be aware of, that ran from 2017 to 2020, we trained 1,000 expert trainers from the government sector. And some of those teachers won awards. They were able to go to the UK. They did pieces of research, which we've published. And they are amazing, amazing teachers.
And these are all teachers who've actually gotten their training programs and who've been part of these teacher training programs in the government schools from the public sector.
Exactly.
Right.
So, you know, teachers, we have testimonials. You know, they say that we really, at the beginning of the project, we didn't know how to teach. And then, as we went through the program and we learned about teaching techniques, we improved, and then they started you know, working with their peers in the school. And so they were aware of how sort of the low quality compared to the possible potential.
So I think these are the things that, and of course, media does need to highlight, because a lot of times, you know, the general conceptions that we do have, unfortunately, is that, you know, the level of public education being imparted in Pakistan is not so good. So I think that's a very important point that you raised, and let's hope that, you know, we aim to do more of such talk shows where we can actually, you know, shed light on these very important people who are actually working to make a difference in the society. On which I'll come to you, Ali Saab, and coming towards the conclusion of the show. I think a very important thing which we must address before we conclude today's show is the fact that, you know, when we talk about Pakistan, we do see that it has some, you know, international commitments in this regard. The Pakistani constitution very clearly lays out, as per Article 25A, that, you know, it's the state's responsibility as well, you know, to ensure that every child aged 5 to 16 years of age gets free and compulsory education as may be determined by the law. But at the end of the day, when we talk about the SDGs, when we talk about, you know, actually achieving all that is set in Vision 2030, how far have we come and what more needs to be done?
So in terms of awareness around SDGs, that is the important bit, which has been achieved mostly through the media partners, through the government partners, through school leaders. So our program include induction for school leaders, orientation for school leaders, make them aware what SDGs are and what role they can play by engaging their teaching community within within the mainstream system, so that they can produce some quality work which can complement into the SDGs. So if we talk about the climate change, COP26 happened in Glasgow, there were a lot of success stories quoted from Pakistan, and as an example, and those have been presented to the whole world. Same is the case if we talk about the culture, so through International School Award, the one that I have been mentioning, a lot of schools, they share their culture with international community. So that motivate and exchange a lot of information about diversity, diverse and beautiful culture that we have in Pakistan.
And that's something, you know, that perhaps both ways basically. It's also a very intelligent way, if you come to think about it, all these transnational, international collaborations, which actually help us, you know, improving our exchange with other countries, which of course has a direct impact on the education system too. Right, so your point is noted. Coming towards you, and to conclude today's show, I think we must also talk about this recent, you know, initiative being launched by the Prime Minister, especially when it comes to, you know, inculcating this basic level of, you know, understanding and know-how of CPR and how particularly it should be done. How do you as an educationist see it? And when we talk about, you know, imparting all these important skills, why are they so important for us at a very basic level?
I think so. It's a very good initiative. Just like, you know, back in when I was student myself, we used to have Girl Guides, we used to have Boy Scouts, and they were taught, you know, the basic life skills when it comes to, you know, giving first aid in terms of, you know, emergencies. So I think so this is something very good and very important, and everybody should be aware as a general human being that, you know, what needs to be done when it comes to emergencies.
Right. And I think in this regard, it will also, of course, have a very positive effect then of, you know, improving the kind of skills that we are inculcating in our children too. But moving on, I think we must also talk about the fact that when we talk about, you know, Pakistan's education system, and when we compare it with other countries, how do you see Pakistan faring?
As far as Pakistan is concerned, it has a long way to go, and it has already started the journey. I'm glad about it. But at this moment, a lot to be done, and I'm sure it will be done in the coming years. Because everybody has stepped into, you know, talking about education, how to reforming it, and how to, you know, taking students into consideration. So I think so it's a very good step.
So I think the things that we need to focus on are just not those which relate to the system, you know, within the system per se, but those which actually externally influence it, something which, you know, with the other panelists rightly so pointed out as well. On which note, I would like to conclude today's show. Thank you so much, Ms. Fiona. Thank you so much, Ali Saab. And thank you so much, Ms. Aroor, for being here with us today.
Thank you.
Well, to conclude today's show, we generally spoke about the pressing need for educational reform. We spoke about the ways in which we can overall improve the quality and the standard of our education system. In this regard, the areas that we need to work upon are overcoming various infrastructural, you know, handicaps. The areas that we need to work upon is to improve and to invest on our, you know, current teacher training programs. And last but not the least, we also need to very seriously prioritize improving access of education, more so of the girl child as it does exist in Pakistan. This is something that we need to prioritize because, you know, educational reform is something which is the need of the hour, you know, because with as they very famously say that, you know, educational reform may not at the end of the day be cheap, but ignorance, when we compare and contrast it with educational reform, is far, far more expensive. On that note, signing off for today. Until next time, take care and Allah Hafiz.